Hey, it's Luis G at Bladeform. We're gonna be doing a comparison between two very different knives, yet very popular knives that tend to often go against each other in comparisons. Uh, you obviously have the CT zero tolerance 561 and the 560 variant with the black scale. And then you have the very popular Spyderco Southard collaboration knife. Now, one of them is collaborated with Spyderco and Brad Southard, obviously the Southard here, and then the other one is a Rick Hinderer zero tolerance collaboration. As some of you guys may know, the two knives are vastly different. One of them is much larger than the other, and one of them actually kind of has more of a tactical role more than a EDC carry, although you could still use it for EDC. The CT sports a LMAX blade. Let's pop these out. The Spyderco sports a CTS 204P super steel. Both of these are considered super steel. One of them focuses more on the corrosion resistance and the edge retention, while the other one is more of a balance of corrosion resistance, toughness, and edge retention. The LMAX steel can take a very nice edge, a very fine edge, due to its molecular structure. The grain is very fine, it's very tight knit, so you can get a very sharp edge. I haven't had an experience with the CTS 204P in sharpening, but out of the factory it's very sharp. It's razor sharp. It does whittle hair just out of the box. The two knives represent two different countries of origin. One of them is made in the United States. The other one is made in Taiwan. That's the Spyderco being made in Taiwan, and the the zero tolerance 561 being made in the United States. Now, this video is not going to be about country of origin because I really don't care where the knife comes from. What I want is something that's good quality. And of course, I'm also a realist, meaning I'm not going to pay you the same amount of money for a US made knife that I'm going to pay you for a Taiwan made knife either, or even a Chinese made knife for the matter of fact. It's two vastly different countries, different manufacturing costs. As simple as that. Now, some key specs to take note are the fact that the zero tolerance knife is actually a longer blade at 3.734 millimeters measured, and then the Spyderco was about 3.42, I think, whenever I measured it with my calipers. So there's a good almost quarter of an inch of difference there. Oh, I'm sorry, I think it was 3.32 or 3.42, but there's a good chunk of blade. And the way that the zero tolerance, the way that the Spyderco makes up for it is with this very interesting sweeping edge, so that they can fit more edge into it compared to, say, a straight line and then the actual drop point. A drop point and then sweep. It's a very nice design, so that even though the blade itself is only about 3.42 inches, there's still plenty of cutting edge. Both of these are titanium frame locks. One of them is CNC machined for comfort, so that it's contoured. That way it wraps, like whenever you put your hand around it, you can wrap your hand nicely around that knife, and you can tell very quickly that this is a much more comfortable knife compared to the Spyderco Southard. This is really more comfortable. This is something that once you've got it in your hand, it almost feels like a fixed blade, and it feels like it's not going to go anywhere. Whereas the Southard, to me, feels very much like it still feels very solid, and it still feels nice, but it feels like I need to grip it a little bit more because of the lack of jimping and the lack of traction on the frame lock. This is very, very smooth, by the way. Now, one of them happens to have obvious material differences. For example, the steels are different, and then the liner is also different. The liner on the CT is steel, while the liner on the Spyderco is actually titanium. Now, both of these knives utilize the same type of pivot system, which is a ball bearing and a washer system. So each one of these knives has two washers impregnated with steel, stainless steel ball bearings. It makes the action very, very smooth. Oops. As you can see there. And both of these knives really present a very good lockup. The lockup achieved on the zero tolerance is at about 70%. Keep in mind this knife has been used for abuse testing. The Spyderco Southard has a lockup of about 50%, and it does not seem to deviate from that, even if you try to push it in. The lockup action, the lockup disengage, feels a lot smoother on the CT, but it's also very, very smooth on the, if you're familiar with Savensas, it's very similar to that on the Southard. The CT feels a lot smoother. It almost feels frictionless, and this is due to one of the differences between the two knives. The titanium frame locks in general happen to be a bit an iffy material choice for a frame lock. The reason behind that is titanium is actually very soft and requires hardening or carbonization on the lock bar surface, so that whenever it meets the blade tang of a high hardness steel, like say for example, I think it's like 61 or something HRC for the zero tolerance, and we're not sure what it is for the Spyderco, but it could be, probably above 61 as well. I doubt that they will try to run it under that and then lose that on the potential for the CTS 204 steel, which its sweet spot is about 63 or so HRC. Well, whenever the frame lock surface contacts the blade tang, it begins to wear without proper carbonization or proper heat treatment. The lock bar will wear it prematurely, and it will cause, well, it will not. It can cause a sticky lock bar, and that happens whenever you try to disengage the lock. That it feels extremely stiff and extremely gritty. It's very hard to open it. It requires you to almost pry it out. Now, this video is going to be a little bit long because we're actually going to be taking apart these knives and comparing them part by part to see, which knife is actually better built as far as materials, as far as materials go, as far as machining, as far as fit and finish, and also durability and durability. And by durability, I don't mean, bashing the knife. I mean, how long is it going to take before one knife wears away with normal use? And we're going to take a look at that. Now, to give some specifications, like I mentioned, the Spyderco Southard is about 3.43 inches in blade length. The zero tolerance 561 is 3.7473. It's about 3.7 inches. We'll just leave it at that. While this is a 3.4 inch blade. Handle materials are G10 on both. G10 scales One of them is CNC machined, again, to contour and to give you a kind of a grippy feel. The Southard does feel grippier, but it feels a lot like sandpaper. And if you keep rubbing your finger on it or rubbing a part of your skin, it will begin to actually irritate your skin and take away some of your skin. It's very, very, extremely, extremely grippy. Even whenever you rub your finger up and down, you get this weird tingling sensation from your skin has just been pretty much sanded down. The lock bar, the frame lock side, of course, the CT wins in that regard. It's just a lot more traction compared to the smooth surface of the Spyderco Southard. The lock bar stabilizer on the Spyderco Southard is G10, while steel on the CT. Steel will definitely outlast G10, but to be perfectly honest, G10 is a very tough material. It's going to be very difficult for you to break this from trying to disengage the lock. You're probably going to bend the lock bar before you do that. So there's not much difference there. The pocket clip is something that I want to note, and I'll post a picture along with the video. The pocket clip on the Southard's a bit sharp. And I will demonstrate. The tip on the Southard is actually pretty sharp, so that whenever you put it into your jeans, if your jeans happen to snag, you guys can see there how easily you rip through that paper. If you were to try doing the same thing on the CT, it would be quite a bit harder to do that. You guys can see here, the hole made by the Southard is more pointy, while the other one's more round. The point of that is, whenever you try to clip this into your pocket, you don't have to worry about anything at all with the CT. You just slide it in, clip it in, and you're good to go. With the Southard, you're going to want to make sure that it doesn't snag on your jeans, because it can actually pierce your jeans quite easily, even denim. It's pretty sharp, and it will pierce through clothing or anything like that. So keep that in mind and be careful whenever you clip it in. It's also a little bit uncomfortable if you put your finger over it, but if you're holding your knife in any position, it does not really interfere with the ergonomics. So they did a good job there, where they designed it so that it wouldn't affect ergonomics, but I guess they kind of mistake that and gave it kind of a sharp point there, and that can dig into your clothes and can create holes there. So keep that in mind. So already out of the box, CT has an advantage there with its deep carry pocket clip, as well as having a safer method of entry for the pocket clip. The frame lock sides, the CT is a much larger chunk of titanium for the frame lock, and it's also just a tad bit thicker, just a little bit thicker. So it's got that also to help a lot. However, the Southard has a little bit thicker of a frame lock on the cutout portion. The cutout portion, I don't have the measurements. I did that at work, but it was just a tiny bit thicker there. However, I think both frame locks should last about the same time. I really thought that they're gonna wear away. The Spyderco Southard surface is hardened through heat treatment, while the zero tolerance is just carbonized. Carbonizing it will actually last longer than hardened titanium surface. So carbonizing is definitely the way to go, and that's what CT did. Let's go ahead and take the pocket clips out. Luckily, they use very similar screws. They use the same screws for the pocket clip. It's a P6 Torx screw. One thing to note is the pivot for the zero tolerance is of a female and male screw counterparts. So they both screw in together, and then they push the knife inwards. The Southard is a little bit different. It's actually just a female pivot with two male screws on each side. So whenever you try to take the knife away apart, keep in mind that the other side needs to be tightened all the way, and then the other side needs to be tightened whichever side you took apart from. So if you're taking it apart from the G10 scale side, you're going to want to make sure that this screw is completely tight before you try to plug this one in. Otherwise, you're going to get a very weird play in the bushing, and you're going to have the blade hitting the liners or being not being perfectly centered. Let's go ahead and remove these. And I would recommend you guys use a little box for whenever you guys take it apart, just so that you guys don't lose anything. To be perfectly honest, I find maintenance on the zero tolerance to be a lot easier compared to the Spyderco Southard, and I'll show you why. We're going to go ahead and take them apart on the frame lock side. We're going to go ahead and switch to a T10 screw. T10 size torque screw bit to take away the zero tolerance handle screws and the pivot bushing for the actually I think I can still use this one. No, okay. Yeah, for the actual pivot you will need to use a T9 on the CT and a T10 for the Spyderco. One thing that I really like about the CT and the fact that I know that they're using pretty good threads is whenever you take the knife apart, if you get this little snap kind of feel to it whenever you take away this, whenever you loosen the screw, it means that the actual threads are pretty well intact, and you probably won't need Loctite for those screws. You will need Loctite for the, you may need Loctite for the pivot screw. I know I did, but you may not actually need it for the handle screws, because those things seem to be pretty well threaded. Now let's go ahead and open these knives before we loosen the pivots. Like I said, you will need a T9 for the CT and a T10 for the pivot. The handle screws on the Southard are T6. Just thought I'd let you know. Let's put this back. I'm gonna take out the handle screws for the Spyderco. As you guys heard, there was no snap. There was just nothing, so these screws could use a Loctite to help keep them in. Whenever you feel that tight snap on the lock, it means that the threading on the screw is actually well fitted, so it shouldn't loosen over time. If you don't have that on the screw, chances are you will need to use some Loctite to make sure it doesn't loosen. There we go. You guys can see here that Spyderco did skeletonize their liner. And let me take apart. Now we're using a T9 to remove the CT pivot. Alright, so right off the bat, you guys can tell that the zero tolerance has had considerable weight reduction done to it by skeletonizing and the pocketing of the titanium frame lock. You guys can see there, also the thickness of the actual liner itself. You can see there that there are several marring marks on the actual skeletonized liner. Most of these came from me, to be perfectly honest. I think these were from like Loctite or something. I don't even know what these come from, but this is definitely me. right there. Whenever it came from the factory, I think there was only that little small mark here, which is kind of a cut in the steel, and a couple of marks here and there, and that was pretty much it. Let's go ahead and pop the scale out. Pop the liner out and take a look inside. Now here's where the where I mentioned that the Southard was a bit of a pain in the rectum to take apart. And let me get, there we go. Apply just a tad bit of loop there, just to give it a little bit of grip on the actual there, on the little. There's actually one thing that I did like about the. Let's talk about the scales first, and then we'll talk about the liners. The scales are pretty much well finished. There's no real difference. Mine are obviously worn a little bit because I've been using it and taking it apart. But as you guys can see there, both of them are polished on the inside so that they don't show any machining marks, which is pretty good. No real sharp edges on the CT. No real sharp edges on the, well, actually, it has some sharpness here on the Spyderco. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know, they're pretty well polished, so they look quite nice. Even the pivots on the inside there, whenever they're, I guess, you know, whenever they drill the hole, they're also, you know, cleaned up a little bit on the inside. So overall, they're both pretty even, except that the Spyderco will have to take the lead, not in finish, but in the fit process. The fitting of the G10 is aided by this little knob here, this little notch, which then sinks into the titanium liner. So I think I'll give that to the Spyderco. Spyderco due to the fit, not so much the finish. The finish is equal, but the fit's a little bit better. Okay, let me pop off the Southard, and this is where I meant that it's a bit of a pain. There we go. That wasn't too bad. There we go. And this is what I mean by it being a pain in the butt to take apart. Alright, there we go. Actually, let me put that back. There. And let me put this back. Alright, so we can see here on the liners that the zero tolerance is considerably more flimsy. Now, say what you want to say, this helps keep the weight down considerably. This knife is not small by any means, it's pretty big. So every kind of weight-saving measure needed to be taken. And to be honest with you, whenever you just take the liner and you try flexing it, you can't do that. But the moment that you add the G10 slab, it gets pretty much stiff, very, very stiff. So as far as durability goes, I can't really knock the CT. And as far as finish goes, I will have to give it to the. In this particular case, I would have to give it to the Spyderco. simply because it came with less flaws. Not to say that it's flawless, because it's not. You can see little machining marks all around the holes here and there, all over the knife. In the cutout, there's small little machining marks. It's not perfectly smooth like on the CTs there, but I'll have to give it to the Spyderco, because it came with less flaws, less obvious flaws. Just a key note for you people who maybe have barely taken apart the Southard. On each of the pivots, on the pivot washers, there is a metal bushing there. So you need to make sure that that's there, and it's there for a reason. I suspect it's stainless steel, and it's to help with the fact that the balls are stainless steel, and then the washers are themselves are stainless steel. That way it doesn't carve into the titanium. Not that it really matters, to be perfectly honest, because the titanium is going to take a long time to wear before anything happens. But I do appreciate the fact that they thought about that. So we got a win for the scale, and we got a win for the liner on the Spyderco side. Now, I have no idea. Never had this knife before. I had no idea why the hell I thought these two pivot bushings were the same. I didn't really get to use that knife very often. I just got it. Didn't like the fact that the scales were kind of disproportionate. Boxed it up and then sent it back. So that's that. The pivot stop, the blade stop, is actually superior on the CT because it utilizes the entire both steel liner and the frame lock as the actual stopping mechanism with this thumb stud right there. This is actually the blade stop. It's considerably thicker. It's harder to fail because it only makes contact on the top of the scales. So there's ever dirt or any kind of mud or anything like that, it's very easy to just wipe that off and get the knife to engage properly. On the Southard, it's a different scenario. If you were to get mud or dirt inside here, you would essentially have to take the knife completely apart and then remove all of that dirt so that your knife will properly lock in place. So that's to keep in mind. The pivot and the pivot on the blade stop, and also the pivot, I will have to give it to the CT, zero tolerance. Now the reason why I'm doing that is because on the zero tolerance, there is no limit to how much pressure or how little pressure you want to apply to the bushings. So you can tighten it up really, really nice and tight so that you can no longer flip it and it becomes harder to open for people who maybe don't want to use a flipper action to have a very loose knife for whatever reason that may be. The pivot bushing also is a little bit sturdier in my opinion, and I will show you why. It's not so much that it's more material, it's just the actual hex top, the top of the bushing is shaped into a hexagon and then it's rounded off. That way whenever it sinks into a titanium, it's pretty much impossible to rotate. Once it's fixed in there, it's fixed in there and that's it. It's not going anywhere. On the, and I'll show you guys here. Let me put these washers up. On the Spyderco, the only thing holding the pivot from rotating on itself, this little pivot right here, is a small notch, a small flat portion that was grinded off, and then a small flat portion that is grinded off onto the actual titanium. That's it. That's its only point of support. If that flat surface on the titanium eventually wears out, it's going to start to spin freely, and you're going to have issues with the alignment of the blade, and also the smoothness and the tension of the action. So it's going to be very difficult. It's also very difficult to adjust. because of the fact that the knife has 2 screws and then an inside female tube. It makes it a good design because it kind of ensures that you can get a precise fit every time. But at the same time, it also means it's going to make it very difficult in the long term, if you ever need to tighten the pivot a little bit or something like that, or loosen it a little bit. So you don't have that option. That's why I'm giving it to the CT. The CTs is a little bit more permanent. It's not going to wiggle. It's going to be more reliable in the long term. In the washers, I would have to give it to CT. They're a little bit more robust. They're a bit more robust, more thicker. They're also better finished, to be perfectly honest. Not that it really matters that much, but you guys can see there the difference in the two systems, in the two washers. One of them is tiny with small ball bearings. The other one is larger with larger ball bearings. These are going to take a lot longer to wear out compared to these ones. Here's the blade stop on the Spyderco, considerably thinner than the blade stop on the zero tolerance. And of course, there are weight differences. The Spyderco weighs about 4.18 ounces or so, while the CT weighs at a solid 6 ounces, and that's with pocket clips. On the standoff sides, to be perfectly honest, I'm gonna have to give the edge to zero tolerance. They're bigger. They fit. They're finished a little bit better with the powder coating. This is worn again, and so whenever these were new, they were new and they looked flawless. And they're also larger and more durable. So I'm gonna have to give it to the zero tolerance. Albeit I do prefer the shinier look of the Spyderco. Now, the finishing on the actual frame lock side, I'm gonna have to give it to the CT. It's 3D machined. It's polished before it's stone washed. It's also wire cut here versus just CNC'd, so that it gives a very nice flush appearance whenever it's open or closed. There's not much of a gap there. The lock bar is carbonized. The actual frame lock itself is even pocketed and then chamfered. The edges are chamfered. There's no comparing it. This slab of titanium did not cost anywhere near as much as this slab of titanium to make it. The machining, the jimping, the excess amount of jimping, to be honest. There's too much jimping on the CT. It's just totally different. And let me try something. I've been meaning to try this because I know with titanium you can have differences in alloys, and often that difference can mean a difference between having a really nice lightweight titanium slab versus having a thicker, a heavier alloy. So we're gonna go ahead and measure that right now. We got the standoffs on there only. So we got a weight of, let's change that to something that more people can understand, 1.8 ounces for the considerably larger titanium frame lock and the slabs, the little standoffs. And let's try the Spyderco. 1.3 ounces with the smaller standoffs and smaller actual frame lock. So we can be pretty sure that they're probably using the same titanium alloy The differences in the size can be attributed to the difference in weight. I was wondering too, because it's a funny thing, but whenever you have these two knives and you hold them, whenever they're closed, the Spyderco definitely feels like a lighter knife, just a little bit lighter. But you could tell that it's lighter. Whenever they're open, it's a whole different story. Whenever they're open, they actually feel the same. I'm not kidding you. They feel the same. They feel like they're both just as heavy. And I think that has to do with the fact that the zero tolerance has a very nice balance to it. The balance is actually in the finger choil on the handle. So whenever you hold it and you try to balance it in your finger, it literally balances just about right there. While the Spyderco has a balance point, a point of gravity, I guess, that's a little bit closer to the handle than it is to the knife. So whenever you're holding this and you're swinging it, it feels almost the same whenever you swing these two knives. Whenever you try to move around with them, but you know one of them is heavier, and it's just the feel of it. It's not so much that it is lighter or anything like that. It's just it feels very, very light whenever it's open, the zero tolerance, and that has to do more with the balancing. So let's go over it again. Right now we have the liner lock, the scale, and I'll also give the finishing. I'll have to give it to the Spyderco as well for the blade. This zero tolerance out of the box had yellowing on the jimping. I don't know what the heck that's from, but it also appears. But it also appears right here on the inside of where they milled out the washer space for it. This wasn't as well finished as the Spyderco's. The Spyderco's is, whenever I just got this knife yesterday. It's pretty much flawless. I couldn't find a single thing on it except for a tiny, tiny little scratch right there. Now, I don't know if you guys can see that, but just a tiny little scratch on the edge, and it's like maybe a millimeter, if not less. I bought the knife used, but I asked the old owner. I was like, "Hey, do you recognize this little mark?" And he was like, "No, that was probably there because I never cut anything with it, not even paper." I'm like, "All right, he didn't cut anything with it. It must have come from factory." But still, the Spyderco definitely wins in the finish, in the finishing of the blade. It's just a lot better than the CT. What else? Overall, whenever I look at these two knives, and like I said, I had already had a Southard before. Honestly, it's kind of interesting to say the least, because both of these knives are pretty much excellent. However, being that the Spyderco is made in Taiwan, it is a little bit cheaper to manufacture there. I don't know about material costs, but I know in China there's a large discrepancy in labor and material costs. Titanium can be less expensive. Materials can be less expensive to make and be just as good as quality. But I find that the Southard, I had paid like $270 on it, and I returned it because I didn't like it because of the disproportionate scales. I thought that price was a little bit too hefty for what it is, which is a Taiwan-produced a high-end knife. And I have nothing against that, to be honest. You do get a little bit of premium. You get titanium liner, and you get better blade steel compared to, say, the CT. But the CT, you get a larger blade, you get more material. You get a lot more material for your buck. And again, the CTs can be had for under $200 new, if you know where to look. At the price point though that I paid for this particular Southard, I paid about 210 at the blade forms used. At $200, I just can't see this knife being beat by anything in the market right now. At $260, it's competing with too many other companies. You have, I think, Lion Steel has some folders for like about that price range. You have Zero Tolerance with a whole lineup of knives in that price range. You have a few other titanium options. You have a lot of knives in that price range. But at $200, it's going to be very difficult to compete. And I'm not saying that the Southern is not worth $260 or $270 or $200. I'm just saying that for $260, I think it's a fair price. $270, $260, it's a fair price. It is. I'm not gonna lie there. It is a fair price, but it isn't like Zero Tolerance where you're actually getting quite a bit for your money. You're getting a CNC scales, which rival custom makers scales. You're getting carbonizing. Once again, that's something that you see very often. You get a premium steel and a nice chunk of it too, to be perfectly honest. Let's weigh these two blades so you guys can see what kind of a beast this Zero Tolerance is. The blade weighs about 2.5 ounces. The Spyderco weighs about 1.3 ounces. So you can see that the difference in the amount of steel is quite great. Even though this is a more expensive steel, this is a very nice chunk of a less expensive steel. So this is going to take a long time before you sharpen it so much that you're going to be left with very little. Overall, for the value, I would have to give it to the CT. It's made in the United States. It's got, you know, CNC scales, pocketing on the frame lock, carbonizing, nice chunk of good super steel, good sized washers. I mean, just everything about the CT screams overbuilt. It's just overbuilt, well designed. You know, with the you know, steel liner being reinforced with the G10, or you know, the G10 being reinforced with the steel liner to save weight. The choice in the contouring of the scale by 3D machining for the titanium frame lock, as well as the G10 for comfort, for grip, compared to this cookie cut G10 scale, you know, where it's just take the freaking G10 slab, finish it all in one shot, cut it out, and then pump it out into your knife. You know, finish it up and then pump it out into your knife. Albeit it did do better here, in my opinion, with this little, with the fit, not the finish, with the fit in this portion right there. And that's the only reason why I gave it to the Spyderco, because it literally fits better. It kind of snaps into place and it feels pretty good, you know. So there's that. But honestly, I feel that the value is more on the CT side than on the Southard side, to be honest. Now, I'm not saying that Spyderco is making a killing off this knife, because I don't think they're making much money on this knife, to be perfectly honest. I really don't think they're making too much money on this knife. One way you can find out really quickly is the production numbers. I think they were saying that they only made about 1,200 of them. The production run. That's 1,200. That's a really small number. CT probably, my knife is already on the 3,000, 3,100, and I've already heard of zero numbers hitting 3,800 and even higher, like 4,000. So CT is making these suckers in the thousands, while Spyderco is making them maybe 1,000 here, maybe a few hundred here, a few thousand there. So there's a lot less numbers, and you could tell that means that they don't have a very high profit margin on this knife. Otherwise, they would mass produce the crap out of it, you know, to maximize profits. But I think that the issue with the Spyderco Southard is the fact that Spyderco is a smaller company. It's a small company, so it can't quite exactly compete with high-end, larger companies in production. So if this knife were to be made by Kershaw or by some other large company, Benchmade or something like that, something tells me that this knife would probably be priced a lot cheaper, maybe $220 or maybe $200 around there. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the review. I hope you guys can, will comment on it. I'm not trying to bash anybody. I'm just here giving you my opinion. If you got any questions, if you got any concerns, let me know. I'll try to address them. And yeah, thanks for watching.